Remember when you were a kid and you believed in stuff like the Easter Bunny? It was a kind of magic that just made sense of things you couldn't explain. And as we get older, we kind of let most of that go. But not everything, it seems. And the Bermuda Triangle? It might just be the biggest, most powerful, grown-up version of that magic we've ever come up with. It really taps into that part of us that wants to believe there's something out there just beyond what we know.
But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the greatest mystery isn't a mystery at all? For this explainer, we're going to push past all the spooky stories and just follow the evidence. We're going to investigate the Bermuda Triangle not as some supernatural vortex, but as a series of events that might just have perfectly logical and maybe even more incredible explanations.
Okay, so let's dive right in. First things first, what even is the Bermuda Triangle? It's not, a place you can find on an official map. It's more of an idea. A massive 1.3 million square kilometer patch of the Atlantic Ocean, kind of wedged between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. And for decades, boy, has it had a reputation.
The whole legend really boils down to three big claims: that planes just drop out of the sky for no reason, that ships are swallowed whole by the ocean, and maybe the creepiest of all, that entire crews just vanish, leaving behind these silent, floating ghost ships. So we're going to take on each one of these pillars, starting with the one case that kicked this whole thing off.
This is the origin story. Picture it, a clear afternoon, December 1945. 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, that's Flight 19, take off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was supposed to be a totally routine training mission for the 14 airmen on board. They finished their practice run, and then they just flew off the edge of the world. They were never seen or heard from again.
Now this is what's so fascinating. These are some of the last words radioed from the flight leader. Listen to that. That doesn't sound like a guy being attacked by aliens or flying into a time warp. That sounds like a pilot who is completely, utterly, and dangerously lost. His gear isn't working, his bearings are gone, and he's in big trouble. And here's the twist that really sealed the deal for the legend. A huge Martin Mariner seaplane with a crew of 13 was sent out to find Flight 19, and it also disappeared. Poof, gone. For the public, this was all the proof they needed. 2 separate disappearances, 27 men, all gone in a single night. It just had to be a curse.
But what really happened? To figure that out, you have to look past the spooky stories and dig into the actual investigation. And I'm talking about the official 500-page Navy report and modern data analysis that has gone back and picked apart every single piece of evidence.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly. On the left, that's the plan, a simple little triangle over the ocean. But on the right, that's what the data suggests actually happened. The flight leader got turned around. He thought he was over the Florida Keys, but he was probably already over mainland Florida, flying deeper and deeper inland, away from safety, not into some mysterious void.
So here's the thing. It wasn't one single supernatural event. It was a tragic chain reaction of human error under unbelievable stress. The leader was lost. The other pilots in his group, whose compasses were probably working fine, they suggested flying west, which would have taken them right to land. But he overruled them. And, crucially, their IFF gear, the very thing that would let radar stations track them, was turned off. They simply flew in the wrong direction until their tanks ran dry.
All right, so let's move on to the next pillar of the legend, which is maybe even spookier, the idea of ghost ships. We're talking about boats found drifting in the middle of the ocean, totally fine, in perfect working order. But the crew? Just gone. And look, this is not just a handful of stories. The U.S. Hydrographic Survey has actually logged more than 1,600 cases of these derelict ships. 1,600. That number is just staggering. It makes you ask the most obvious and chilling question there is. Where in the world did all the people go?
Well, instead of looking for sea monsters or UFOs, scientists point to a kind of perfect storm of really powerful forces: crazy weather, unique geography, and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, the vulnerabilities of our own minds when we're pushed to the absolute limit.
For centuries, sailors told these stories about monster waves, and everybody else just kind of rolled their eyes, thinking they were just tall tales. Well, it turns out they're real. They're called rogue waves, and they're not just big waves. We're talking about vertical walls of water that can pop up out of nowhere, even in calm seas. They're powerful enough to put so much pressure on a ship's hull that they can literally snap a giant steel freighter in half.
And here's the kicker. Rogue waves aren't some once-in-a-lifetime event. NASA estimates that there are at least 10 of these ship killers roaming the oceans at any given moment. They're a constant, statistical threat. It's very likely that many of the ships that vanished without a trace actually met one of these.
Okay, but what about the ghost ships, the ones that are found perfectly fine? This is where psychology comes in. Under intense, life-or-death stress, our brains can trigger something called an amygdala hijack. Basically, the primitive fight-or-flight part of your brain just takes over, and it shuts down the part that makes rational decisions. It's why an experienced captain might suddenly abandon a perfectly good ship in a panic, or why a thirsty sailor makes the fatal mistake of drinking salt water.
And you can just keep adding to this. Back in the day, sailing ships could get stuck for weeks in areas with no wind, called the doldrums, or get tangled in the thick seaweed of the Sargasso Sea. Supplies run out, severe dehydration. Well, it makes you hallucinate, it makes you paranoid. A desperate, delirious crew could easily start seeing monsters in the waves and just jump right overboard. So, if every part of this mystery seems to have a scientific or psychological answer, how did this one specific patch of ocean get such a scary reputation? I mean, where did the name Bermuda Triangle even come from?
And this is how a modern myth is made. It's not some ancient mariner's tale. The name itself was literally invented in 1964 by a writer for a pulp fiction magazine. He just strung together a few different, unrelated disappearances, like Flight 19, to make a sensational story. And then 10 years later, a blockbuster book by Charles Berlitz took that little magazine article and turned it into a massive global phenomenon.
But when you look at the cold, hard data, the whole myth just crumbles. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't even have a particularly high accident rate. In fact, busy and stormy shipping lanes like the South China Sea or the Bay of Bengal are statistically way more dangerous.
And here it is. If you don't believe the data, just follow the money. Insurance companies, right? Their entire business is betting billions of dollars on calculating risk. If there was even a shred of evidence that the triangle was more dangerous, they would charge an absolute fortune in premiums to go through it. They don't. Not one extra cent.
And even that oldest piece of evidence, the weird lights that Christopher Columbus wrote about in his diary, well, there's a pretty simple explanation for that too. Think about it. He'd been at sea for months. He was exhausted, anxious. He most likely just saw the campfires of the native Taino people on a nearby island. He couldn't identify it, so he wrote it down as a mystery.
So, when you actually look at each piece of the legend, all the supernatural stuff just evaporates. You're left with pilot error, rogue waves, sudden storms, equipment failure, and the terrible things panic can do to the human mind. The real mystery isn't out there in the water.
It's the story we tell ourselves. And in a strange way, believing in a cursed place or a hungry sea monster can actually be more comforting than the alternative, which is that the world can be a random place, and that sometimes horrible accidents just happen for no big reason at all. A monster is an answer. Senseless tragedy is a lot harder to live with.
So in the end, the most powerful force at work in the Bermuda Triangle isn't some strange energy field. It's the pull of a really good story. It's a testament to our deep human need for a little bit of wonder, for a little bit of mystery, and for our incredible ability to find patterns and meaning, even and maybe especially when there aren't any there at all.